So in Melbourne, over the last year, we've been looking at the minor prophets. And it so happens there are 12 minor prophets, so we've done one each month. So we are now coming to the end of our series. We're on our second last of the minor prophets, and that's Zechariah. I don't know what you know about the history of that time for the children of Israel. I'm not sure whether you're familiar with it, but let me give you a potted history of the minor prophets. It begins with Hosea, and in Hosea's time we see the threat of the Assyrian Empire. So these fearsome warriors who are on the cusp of controlling the Middle East, and the children of Israel, the nation of Israel, the nation of Judah are watching this threat as it advances. Ultimately, the Assyrians march in and they conquer the northern kingdom of Israel and take them away. And from that point on, the nation of Israel, the northern part of the children of Israel, really disappears. And we're left with the nation of Judah in the south. And then we move on in time, and the Assyrian Empire declines, and they are taken over by a new empire, the Babylonians. And the Babylonians then become the big threat in the Middle East, and they ultimately hold a huge area of land that they control. And they do manage then to take over not only this northern part that the Assyrians have conquered, but they also conquer the children of Judah, the southern kingdom. And so we have what is known as the exile. And there's a period of approximately 70 years when Judah, that the rulers of Judah are exiled into Babylon. And as time passes again, things change again. And the children of Judah, the people of Judah, are brought back into the land, and they re-establish the nation of Judah. They re-establish in their home country the religion that they've always hung on to. And this is where we see the prophecy of Zechariah coming in. So Zechariah begins, verse 1 of chapter 1, in the 8th month of the second year of Darius. That's the king of the Babylonian and Persian Empire. The word of the Lord came to Zechariah, the son of Berechiah, the son of Iddo, the prophet. Now, last month we heard about the prophecy of Haggai. And Haggai begins in the second year of King Darius, in the 6th month, on the first day of the month. The second year of King Darius again. So here we have two prophets that are working side by side. And in actual fact, in one of the biblical books, the book of Ezra, the two prophets, Haggai and Zechariah, are mentioned together. Now, Zechariah means Jehovah remembers. Jehovah remembers. And I think in that name there's a sense of the potential, the new potential of this religion being re-established. Something that we thought we'd lost is being re-established in our current time. And that word, Jehovah remembers, it's the same word that's used in the commandment, remember the Sabbath day to keep it holy. So I think all of this is tied up in this name, Zechariah. Now, it just so happens John the Baptist's dad is called Zacharias. It's the Greek form of the same name, Zacharias, Zechariah. Not the same person, but it's the same name, and the name is really significant, I think. Now, the book of Zechariah is one of the longest of the minor prophets. It's 14 chapters long, the same as Hosea, the first of the minor prophets, 14 chapters. But they're called minor not because of their lack of importance, but because they're short. So it's still a relatively easy book to read quite quickly. It doesn't take long to get through the book of Zechariah. But it's also one of the most influential of the minor prophets. So it begins with a call to repentance. You know, the Lord remembers. It's for us to remember the Lord also. This is key to the beginning of the book. And then we launch straight into a series of visions. Now, if I read you what the titles of those visions, you might recognize some of them, especially if you're familiar with the book of Revelation. So have a listen to these titles. So first of all, there's the vision of the horses that Howard read for us this morning. We move on to the vision of 4 horns and 4 craftsmen. Then there's the man with the measuring line in his hand. Then there's the vision of Joshua the high priest and Satan standing at his right hand to oppose him. There's the lampstand among the olive trees. There's a flying scroll. There's a woman in a basket. And there's 4 chariots, red, black, white, and dappled. As I say, if you're familiar with the book of Revelation, many of those images crop up in the book of Revelation. And then the second half of the book of Zechariah is a series of commands and prophecies. So, for example, there's a command to crown Joshua the high priest. There's the idea of the restoration of Israel. There's an image of the shepherds and the shepherd saviour, and the contrast between those two. And it finishes with the day of the Lord. Now, what I want to do today is go back to the vision of the horses and the chariots. So Howard read it for us from chapter 1 and also from chapter 6. And I imagine, again, if you're familiar with Revelation, you would be thinking of the early visions in the book of Revelation in chapter 6. There's the 4 horsemen. And in Revelation, they are riding a white horse, a red horse, a black horse, and a pale horse. And then towards the end of the book of Revelation, there's this rather wonderful vision in chapter 19 of the rider on the white horse. And that is a picture of the Lord. The Lord. So I want to think about horses. You like horses? I like horses. We used to, round the corner from where we used to live in Canberra, there was a horse holding paddock. Lovely place, lots of lovely horses there. But we forget in our modern world how important horses used to be. Right up to the Industrial Revolution, horses were the power behind everything that took place. If you wanted to travel and you weren't going to walk there, how would you get there? You'd go on horseback, or you'd go in a carriage which is pulled by a horse. So they're valued for their speed, they're valued for their endurance, they can cover long distances, and they're valued for their strength, for what they can carry and for what they can pull. And they really were the backbone of civilization. As I say, right up until the Industrial Revolution, when you have trains and engines start to take over some of that work. And they are also an integral part of the machinery of war. And so in that vision of the chariots, the 4 chariots, there you have the machinery of war, which is displayed. So what do horses represent? So we know what they do in the natural world. We're looking for the thing that does that for our spirit, for our spiritual world. And when we talk about what horses represent, there's a number of things that sort of crop up to mind. There's the Greek mythology of Pegasus, the flying horse, the horse with wings. So not only travelling along the ground, but also able to travel up in the air and cover long distances that way. But of course, in other literature as well, we find horses. Has anybody read the Harry Potter series? We did with our children. And there's a rather interesting horse in the Harry Potter series. It's book 5 of the Order of the Phoenix. What comes up is a horse called a thestral. And a thestral's a really interesting horse because you can only see it if you've seen death. So there's something about perception. If you've seen death, you're able to see these deathly looking horses. But up until that point, the reason they happen in the 5th book is that up until that point, Harry's not seen death. So when he's going to school, he sees these carriages which are drawn along as if by magic from the train station to the school. Suddenly he can see what's pulling them, the thestral, because he's seen death. And in another novel by Jonathan Swift, Gulliver's Travels, there's rather an interesting group, a nation that Gulliver visits, and it's the Huinim. And they are a nation of talking horses. And these talking horses value reason, and they value conversation and sitting down and thinking through matters rather than being led by your base bodily desires. And I remember seeing the Ted Danson version of the story. And there's this contrast between the Huinim, the horses who can speak and they reason everything through, and the Yahoos. And the Yahoos look like people, but they are driven by their desires. And you know, there's this conversation. Gulliver is trying to persuade the Huinim that he's more like a Huinim than he is like a Yahoo. So it's all about reason for Gulliver's Travels. And I came across this the other day, looking up this idea. And this is from a book about the symbolism of a horse. And it says this: the horse represents freedom without restraint, travel, movement, and desire. If you had a horse, you were free to travel unfettered. To the native tribes of the Americas, horses represented power. Tribes that owned horses won more battles and controlled more territory. Bible verses characterize the horse as a symbol of intelligence. Colour affects the horse's symbolism. So a red horse symbolizes destruction. And in dreams, the black horse of death is synonymous with misery. Now, Swedenborg shares a rather interesting dream or vision that he has that includes a horse. Let me read it for you, and then he gives an interpretation of it. So this is from Doctrine of Sacred Scripture. It's paragraph 26, but it's also repeated in True Christian Religion if you're ever looking for it. And he says this: I was given to see large purses looking like sacks, which had stored away in them a great deal of silver. Since they were open, it seemed as if anyone might take some of the silver deposited in them, even to make off with it. However, next to the purses, 2 angels were sitting as guards. The place where the purses rested looked like a manger in a stable. In the next room I saw modest maidens together with a chaste wife. Near that room were 2 little children, and I heard it said they were not to be played with in a childish way, but wisely. Afterward, a harlot appeared, then a horse lying dead. And here's his interpretation. On seeing these images, I was informed that they represented the literal meaning of the word, which has a spiritual meaning within it. The large purses full of silver symbolized concepts of truth there in great abundance. The purses being open and yet guarded by angels symbolized that anyone might draw concepts of truth there but that people should take care not to falsify the spiritual meaning, which contains only truths. The manger in the stable, where the purses were sitting, symbolized spiritual instruction for the intellect. A manger has this symbolism because a horse which feeds from it symbolizes the intellect. The modest maidens I saw in the next room symbolized affections for truth, and the chaste wife the conjunction of truth and good. The little children symbolized the innocence of the wisdom in it. They were angels from the third heaven, all of whom appeared like little children. The harlot, together with the dead horse, symbolized the falsification of the word by many people today, by which all understanding of the truth has been extinguished. So, for the new church, the horse symbolizes, it represents the rational mind, the power of the understanding. And when we see a horse pulling a chariot, as say, part of the mechanism of war, we're talking about the way our mind, the power of our rational mind engages in temptation and the temptations we endure. Now, when Swedenborg writes about Zechariah, and he does so in the little book called The Psalm and the Prophets, he writes this about that vision. It represents the successive states of the church, even to the end of the church, and the nature of their understanding of the word is described. The nature of the understanding of the word. And this is the world into which the Lord is born. A world which no longer grasps the spiritual reality inherent in the word itself. All that there is the husk, nothing more than that. And when we come to apply this to ourselves, I want you to grasp one important thing. Our understanding of the Lord and his word inevitably shapes the way we read the word. So what we gain from the word, we do so because of our perception of it. And the way we read the word inevitably stands as a testimony to our own inner character. The way we read the word stands as testimony to our own inner character. So, for example, if I see God as angry, judgmental, vengeful and vindictive, that might reflect something of my own sense of judgment of others, or perhaps judgment of myself. Perhaps I live in fear of a God who is vengeful and angry. But perhaps I live in self-righteousness and rage, angry about the injustices I see out there in the world around me. On the other hand, if I see God as loving, I will focus upon what is of love in the Word and in the world, and in my own response to what happens to me and what I see in the world around me. Sometimes we read the word to excuse poor behaviour. And sometimes we read the word and it highlights and challenges our own inner failures and stirs us to change. So you see, the way we see the Lord and the way we see the word stands as testimony to our own inner character, our own inner nature. So when I read something like, this is from the Psalm, Psalm 20 verse 7, it says, "Some trust in chariots and some in horses, but we will remember the name of the Lord our God." And I take that to mean that as we read the word, we need to guard against imposing an interpretation which comes from my own understanding, my own interpretation of what the word is saying. We need to recognize that that's my natural tendency to impose an understanding, a particular perception of something, and then, hold that at bay and be ready to receive what the Lord actually is trying to say to me, to be open to that, to hear what the word teaches me, not the way it confirms my own attitudes about things. And that is more difficult than it sounds at times. You see, we are so naturally and unconsciously just impose our way of looking at the world. We look at the world through rose-coloured spectacles or perhaps dark-coloured glasses, and it becomes unconscious. So for us then to go to the word and take off our spectacles and look at them and see what how is this affecting the way that I see, is just a very valuable thing to do. So that for me is wrapped up in that passage from the Psalms. You see, Zechariah said of John the Baptist, his son, he said, "You have come to give light to those who sit in darkness and the shadow of death, to guide our feet into the way of peace." And Jesus, in John's Gospel, in chapter 3, talks about the way we come to the light, we come to the Word. And this is what he says. "And this is the condemnation, that the light has come into the world, and men loved darkness rather than light because their deeds were evil. For everyone practicing evil hates the light, and does not come to the light, lest his deeds should be exposed. But he who does the truth comes to the light, that his deeds may be clearly seen, that they have been done in God." So the word is the light. It's the light we come to. It's the light that measures us. We think we read the word. The word reads us. That's the reality of it. So all I'm going to ask you this morning is just to reflect on, how do you understand the word? And what does that understanding reveal about you?